When time slowly crossed into February 13th, 1258, an unnatural silence descended upon the magnificent palace at the heart of Baghdad, a palace that had carried the weight of Abbasid power on its shoulders for 36 long years. Its walls had heard laughter, poetry, political intrigue, and whispered prayers. They had seen ambassadors bow and armies pledge loyalty. Yet on this morning, the palace did not echo with voices. It breathed no sound at all. This was not an ordinary silence. It was the kind that settles before catastrophe, the kind that precedes collapse, the kind that arrives not with warning bells, but with absence. The fountains that flowed endlessly through the golden halls, symbols of abundance, prosperity, and divine favor, suddenly stopped. Water froze in stone basins, channels ran dry. The gentle sound that had once soothed the rulers of an empire vanished. It felt as though the city itself had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe, as if an unseen hand had tightened around Baghdad's throat and refused to let go. This was the same Baghdad the world once recognized as the capital of knowledge and wisdom. A city spoken of in reverent tones from Andalusia to Central Asia, a city scholars reached only after crossing burning deserts and treacherous seas. Men traveled for months just to sit in its libraries, to debate in its courtyards, to copy its manuscripts. Baghdad was not merely a city, it was an idea. At its heart stood the House of Wisdom, a sanctuary of human intellect unmatched anywhere on earth. Greek philosophy, Persian science, Indian mathematics, and Islamic theology lived side by side on its shelves. Translations, innovations, discoveries, all breathed within its walls. Water flowed through the city like life itself, feeding gardens, markets, mosques, and homes. In such a place, springs drying without reason could never be dismissed as coincidence. This silence was not emptiness. It was an announcement, a voiceless scream declaring that the end was near. Beyond the palace walls, the horizon had vanished. Wherever the eye turned, the Mongol army stood. Not scattered camps, not distant banners, but a solid mass of humanity and steel. Hundreds of thousands of horsemen stretched from one edge of sight to the other, their presence swallowing the landscape itself. It was as if the earth had given birth to an army. These were not men who built cities. They did not preserve libraries. They did not debate philosophy or revere history. They understood only one truth, domination. They spoke only one language, the language of conquest. And they needed only a few days to erase an 800-year-old civilization from the pages of history. Yet the true horror would not begin with the fall of Baghdad. History would remember that the real catastrophe began only after the city gates were shattered, when restraint vanished and annihilation took its place. At the center of this unfolding tragedy stood al-Mustasim Billah, the Abbasid caliph who had ruled for 36 years. He was no ordinary monarch. To millions, he was God's shadow on earth, the successor of the Prophet Muhammad, the living symbol of a dynasty that had ruled continuously for 8 centuries. His empire had once stretched from Spain to India. His name was recited in sermons. Coins bore his titles. Yet beneath the layers of tradition and reverence, the foundation had begun to rot. The Abbasid dynasty had grown old. Its strength had faded into ceremony. Its confidence had hardened into arrogance. Its connection to reality had quietly dissolved. Al-Mustasim himself was weak-willed and indulgent. He preferred comfort over vigilance, luxury over preparation. He surrounded himself with men who whispered reassurances and silenced doubt. Advisors who told him only what he wished to hear found favor. Those who warned of danger were dismissed, drowned in luxury. The caliph convinced himself that titles alone could stop armies, that sacred lineage could halt steel, that tradition could repel fire. Even when the Mongol army reached Baghdad's gates, he deceived himself once more. He believed the world would bow before him. He believed God would protect him personally. He believed no one, no matter how savage, would dare raise a hand against the seat of the caliphate. But the man standing beyond his walls was Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan. By the time the Mongols reached Baghdad, they were no longer merely an army. They were a force of nature, a moving disaster, a tide that erased everything in its path. Across Iran, they had obliterated more than 40 cities. Entire populations vanished. They had crushed armies 10 times their size. Rivers ran red with blood. Towers of severed heads were raised not for strategy, but for terror, a warning written in flesh. Now the richest city on earth lay beneath their boots. Hulagu sent his message. Simple, cold, final. If you surrender, your life will be spared. If you resist, your city will turn to dust, your palaces to ash, your family will suffer, and your name will be erased from history. Al-Mustasim laughed. He gathered his court and mocked the warning. These barbarians, he said, did not know whom they were challenging. He stood tall and declared, I am the Caliph. God will never abandon me. But fate had already written its verdict. On January 29, 1258, the Mongol assault began. This was no ordinary siege. Baghdad had faced enemies before, but never like this. Chinese engineers deployed gunpowder weapons unfamiliar to the city. Siege machines of terrifying scale were assembled. Explosions shattered walls thought impregnable. Day and night, the bombardment continued. The sky shook. Towers collapsed. Defenders watched helplessly as centuries of stone cracked like clay. By February 13th, resistance collapsed completely. That day, Hulagu Khan stood inside the Abbasid throne room. The caliph, who once believed himself untouchable, now knelt in the dust. His golden robe was torn. His turban lay discarded on the floor. The illusion of divine protection had shattered completely. All that remained was a frightened mortal staring into the abyss. What followed ranks among the darkest and most shameful scenes in human history. Hulagu looked upon the caliph with cold amusement and asked a question that would echo through time. Where is your God now? Gold and jewels were piled before the broken ruler. The treasure of centuries was forced into his mouth. He was made to eat the wealth he had worshipped. His suffering was deliberate, symbolic, cruel. Then his children were brought before him. His sons were wrapped tightly in carpets so their noble blood would not spill, and crushed beneath the hooves of horses. Their screams faded into silence. His daughters were dragged away, violated, enslaved, and sent to distant lands. A lineage that had ruled the Islamic world for 8 centuries was extinguished in a single night. Finally, the caliph himself was wrapped in a carpet. A feast was held upon him. Generals ate and drank above his suffocating body. Laughter echoed through the throne room. And beneath the celebration, a man slowly died. Thus ended 800 years of Abbasid rule. Not with honor, not with resistance, but beneath a carpet. After that, Baghdad was left without a master. The massacre began. Scholars, merchants, women, children, no one was spared. Mosques became slaughterhouses. Streets filled with bodies. The House of Wisdom burned. Manuscripts representing centuries of human thought were thrown into the Tigris River. The water turned black with ink, then red with blood. Baghdad became a vast cemetery. The Mongols moved on, but Baghdad remained behind as a symbol, a warning, a wound carved into history, because it was not merely a city that fell that week. A civilization was broken, and this story still reminds us that no power, no knowledge, no glory is immune to collapse. Disaster does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it begins in silence, the same silence that descended upon the fountains of Baghdad that day.